I never expected a simple smile to change everything, but when a widow looked at me with eyes full of memory and whispered, "You remind me of the man I used to love," my world, and hers, would never be the same. I didn't expect that evening to stay with me the way it did. It was nothing more than a quiet gathering, a few friends, soft music in the background, the faint hum of conversation and clinking glasses. I had gone there almost reluctantly, more out of politeness than excitement. But then, in the corner of the room, I saw her. She stood near the window, the glow of the fading sun outlining her figure in warm, amber light. There was a stillness about her, not awkward, but deliberate. She wasn't trying to draw attention, yet my eyes kept drifting back to her. There was something in the way she carried herself, composed yet faintly distant, as if she were half in the room and half somewhere far away. When a mutual acquaintance introduced us, I caught the first true glimpse of her face. She was beautiful, yes, but in a way that felt timeless. Lines of laughter and sorrow traced lightly around her eyes, the kind you only earn from living fully. And when she smiled at me, it wasn't a casual social gesture. It was soft, almost thoughtful, as though she were seeing something beneath the surface. Her hand slid into mine for a handshake. Warm, delicate, but steady. The kind of touch that lingers a fraction longer than you expect. That moment alone might have been enough to leave an impression, but then she tilted her head slightly, studying me in silence, and whispered words I'll never forget. "You remind me of the man I used to love." At first, I didn't know what to say. Her voice wasn't heavy with sadness, it was gentler, touched with memory, as if she were speaking to herself more than to me. But the effect on me was immediate. A strange blend of humility, curiosity, and a quiet ache stirred in my chest. I felt flattered, but also uncertain. Did she see me, or only a reflection of someone else? I smiled back, choosing silence rather than clumsy words. Still, I couldn't help but wonder about the life behind those eyes, the man she spoke of, and what it meant for her to even say that to me. As the evening moved on, I found myself drawn into brief conversations with her. She laughed lightly at something I said, not forced, but genuine, and the sound surprised both of us. Her laughter carried warmth, but also the faintest echo of someone rediscovering it after a long time. The room, filled with chatter and background noise, seemed quieter when she was near. I noticed the faint scent of lavender clinging to her, the way she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she listened, and the steadiness of her gaze when our eyes met. It wasn't just polite interest, it was searching, as though she wanted to know what else about me reminded her of the man she once loved, and what didn't. That night, as I left, her words replayed in my mind. "You remind me of the man I used to love." I didn't yet understand why they mattered so much to me. But I knew, with an odd certainty, that this wasn't the last time our paths would cross. A few days after that evening, I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But life has a way of weaving people back into your days when you least expect it. I was leaving the market, carrying a bag heavier than I'd planned for, when I saw her struggling just a little with her groceries. Her expression was composed, as always, but her arms were full, and a carton of milk teetered dangerously on the edge of the paper bag. Before I had time to second-guess myself, I stepped forward. "Here, let me help you." She looked at me, startled at first, then softened into that same gentle smile. "Well, aren't you a kind soul," she said, allowing me to take some of the weight from her. It felt natural to walk beside her, the late afternoon sun painting everything in gold. She told me her house wasn't far, and the conversation flowed with unexpected ease. Nothing dramatic, just small talk about the weather, the town, the way the seasons seem to slip by faster each year. But underneath the ordinary words was something warmer, like an unspoken thread slowly knitting us closer. When we reached her home, she invited me in for tea as a thank you. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity outweighed formality. Her house reflected her, elegant but simple, with bookshelves lined neatly and photographs arranged carefully on a wooden table. The faint smell of chamomile and polished wood filled the air. It didn't feel like a place frozen in grief, but rather a space that had learned to breathe quietly after storms. As she brewed the tea, I found myself studying the small details, the way she tucked her hair back with a deliberate motion, the quiet concentration in her eyes as she measured the leaves, the unhurried rhythm of her movements. There was grace in the way she did everything, as though she lived each moment with awareness. We sat at her kitchen table, sipping from porcelain cups. At first, we exchanged light stories, but soon she began to open up in fragments. She spoke of her garden, of how she used to love planting tulips with her husband in the spring. Her voice trembled just slightly when she mentioned him, but then steadied again, like someone learning how to walk after stumbling. She laughed, a soft, husky laugh that startled both of us. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the woman she must have been before loss carved its shadows across her life. At one point, when I handed her the sugar bowl, our fingers brushed. The touch was nothing, brief, accidental, but it sent a current through me all the same. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for a heartbeat too long, neither of us looked away. The air in the room shifted. Not enough to be spoken of, not enough to break the fragile safety of our tea and conversation, but enough to make me realize something had begun. Something subtle, unplanned, but undeniably present. That day, as I left her home, I noticed the way she lingered at the doorway, watching me go. Not just with politeness, but with a kind of unspoken gratitude. And I knew, whether by fate, chance, or something in between, this was no longer a passing acquaintance. A bond was forming, fragile but real, and it was only a matter of time before it deepened. It was a quiet evening when I found myself back at her house, this time not by chance, but by invitation. She had asked if I could help her move a few boxes down from the attic, things she said she hadn't touched in years. I agreed without hesitation, not because the task was difficult, but because part of me wanted to be near her again. The boxes were filled with fragments of a life lived before me, old photographs, travel souvenirs, and carefully folded letters tied with ribbons. As I handed them down to her, I noticed her eyes linger on certain items longer than others. There was a pause in her voice, as though she was carrying more than the weight of the box itself. Later, when the work was done, she offered me tea again. This time, we sat not at the kitchen table, but in her living room, where a soft lamp cast a warm glow over the shelves of books and framed memories. She picked up one of the photographs from the box, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. "That was taken in Italy," she said quietly. "My husband always wanted to see Florence. He said the city had a way of teaching you how to fall in love with life again." Her voice carried both pride and sorrow. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just let her speak, and in that silence, something opened between us. She turned the photo face down on the table, as if it was too much to keep looking at. Her hands trembled slightly. I didn't think, I just reached out, placing my hand gently over hers. It wasn't bold, it wasn't meant to intrude. It was simply a quiet offering of presence. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, her fingers relaxed beneath mine. She didn't pull away. "I haven't let anyone this close since he passed," she admitted, her voice raw but steady. "It feels like a betrayal, even to sit here and speak of him to you. And yet, for the first time in years, I don't feel so alone." Her confession was not rehearsed. It was vulnerable, and it made the air between us feel fragile, as though one wrong word might shatter everything. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say, but I knew honesty was the only thing that would matter. "I'm not him," I said softly. "And I never could be. But I don't want to replace what you lost. I just want to know you, the woman you are now." Her eyes lifted to mine, shimmering with tears that didn't fall. In them, I saw both the depth of her grief and the quiet spark of something else, something she was almost afraid to name. We sat there in silence, our hands still touching, the soft tick of the clock filling the space. And in that silence, I realized something important. Closeness doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes, it begins in the quiet act of simply being there, in choosing to stay, even when words fall short. That night, as I walked home, the weight of her vulnerability stayed with me. It wasn't just her past she had shown me, it was her present, her fears, her guarded hope. And somehow, I knew that what was beginning between us was no longer something either of us could easily ignore. It happened on a night when the world outside seemed determined to keep us together. A storm had rolled in, rain hammering the windows, wind rattling the branches outside. I had stopped by earlier to check on her, to make sure she wasn't alone in the storm. She insisted she was fine, but when the thunder cracked, she gave a small, almost playful smile and said, "Well, maybe I don't mind the company after all." She moved about the kitchen, barefoot on the wooden floor, the soft light above casting a glow over her. I watched as she filled the kettle, her robe brushing lightly against her frame, her movements unhurried but precise. There was a comfort in the way she occupied her home, and yet, for me, the atmosphere felt charged, as though every ordinary motion carried weight. The rain grew heavier, beating against the glass, while the scent of lavender drifted faintly from the candle she had lit. She handed me a cup of tea, her fingers grazing mine. That small, fleeting touch sent a current through me, not dramatic, but unmistakable. We sat near the window, listening to the storm, sipping tea in silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken thoughts, every glance carrying more meaning than words could. I found myself studying the lines of her face, the way the light caught the softness of her skin, the depth in her eyes that seemed to hold both past and present at once. She placed her cup down, her hand lingering on the rim as though she were gathering courage. Then she looked at me, her gaze steady but vulnerable. "You remind me of him, but not in the way you think. It's not about how you look, or even the way you speak. It's the way you listen, the way you're here." Her words lingered in the air like the scent of rain. I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I leaned just slightly closer, enough that the space between us felt charged. The thunder cracked again, and in that flicker of sound, she reached out, resting her hand on my arm. It was a simple gesture, but it carried an intensity that made my chest tighten. I could feel the warmth of her palm through my sleeve, could see the faint tremor in her hand, the silent question in her eyes. For a moment, time slowed. The storm outside faded to a distant hum. Our eyes locked, hers searching, mine quietly pleading for permission neither of us wanted to say aloud. The air was heavy with a truth we were both afraid to claim. But then, just as quickly, she pulled her hand back. She smiled softly, almost apologetically, and murmured, "We should finish our tea before it gets cold." I nodded, though the taste of the tea no longer mattered. What lingered wasn't the warmth in the cup, but the warmth of her touch, the weight of her gaze, and the certainty that something had shifted between us. When I left later that night, the storm still raging, I carried more than the memory of her hand on my arm. I carried the knowledge that we had crossed an invisible line, a line neither of us dared to speak of, but one we both felt deeply. And from that moment forward, there was no turning back. The days that followed were different. There was an unspoken shift between us, a fragile thread of connection that now seemed both precious and terrifying. I noticed it immediately. She wasn't as quick to invite me over. Her messages were shorter, polite but distant. It was as if the storm that had drawn us together had also revealed a line she wasn't ready to cross, and she was stepping back before either of us could get hurt. I found myself replaying that evening endlessly in my mind, the warmth of her hand on my arm, the tremor in her voice, the intensity of her gaze. It wasn't just longing I felt, it was something deeper, a desire to understand her completely while respecting the invisible boundaries she had built around her heart. When we did see each other, the distance was tangible. She was polite, careful with her words, as if she were measuring each one before letting it out. Her smile was still there, but it was softer, cautious. I tried to match her tone, to ease the tension, but sometimes I could sense her pulling back, even in the simplest gestures. She would brush past me lightly, or hand me something with a slight hesitation, her eyes briefly flicking away from mine. I wondered constantly what she was thinking. Was she afraid of repeating the past? Was she worried I might leave if she opened her heart too soon? The uncertainty gnawed at me. I wanted to tell her everything, that I didn't see her as a replacement for anyone, that I only wanted to know her, in her present, in her truth. But I also didn't want to push her. I couldn't risk breaking the fragile trust she had offered. One evening, I walked past her house and saw her through the window, sitting alone on the couch, a book in her lap but her gaze distant. The light from the lamp illuminated her face softly, revealing a trace of loneliness I hadn't seen before. She looked up as if sensing someone outside, and when our eyes met for just a brief moment, I caught the same flicker of something she clearly tried to hide, longing, regret, or maybe just the fear of being hurt again. It was in those small, silent moments that I realized the depth of the emotional wall she had built. Her hesitation wasn't just about me, it was about herself, about protecting a heart that had known profound love and even deeper loss. And yet, despite the distance she put between us, I could feel the invisible thread pulling us closer, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to draw tighter. I spent that night walking home in the quiet, replaying every glance, every half-smile, every brush of her hand that lingered too long. The ache of uncertainty was sharp, but it was also telling me something I couldn't ignore. This connection mattered too much to let go. And so, I decided to wait, not out of fear, but out of respect. I would give her the space she needed, even as I held on to the hope that we could return to that fragile closeness, perhaps stronger than before. Because some bonds, I realized, were not meant to be rushed. They had to be nurtured, slowly, with patience, and with the courage to face the doubts and fears that came with real intimacy. It was one of those quiet evenings that seemed to exist outside the rush of the world. She had called me unexpectedly, asking if I could join her for dinner. The invitation felt deliberate, like an olive branch, a subtle acknowledgement that the distance between us was no longer sustainable. I arrived to find her in the soft glow of her dining room, the table set simply, yet with a care that spoke of thoughtfulness and attention to detail. We ate slowly, neither of us rushing, each bite punctuated by gentle conversation. But beneath the surface of ordinary topics, books we were reading, news in the town, small memories of childhood, there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, something heavy with possibility. Every glance she cast in my direction lingered just a little too long. Every brush of her hand as she passed me, the salt felt weighted with intention. Finally, I could no longer hold back the question that had been growing in me, coiling tighter with every hesitant interaction, every careful smile. "Why the distance?" I asked softly, meeting her eyes across the table. "I can feel it, and I don't know if I should step closer or step back." She set down her fork, hands folding over one another in a way that suggested both nervousness and courage. Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid that if I let myself feel again, it might be too soon. Afraid that I'm betraying his memory. And yet, I also feel that if I don't let myself feel, I'll never know what it is to be alive again." Her words were a mirror of my own hidden fears. I reached across the table, covering her hands with mine. The warmth of her skin against mine made my chest tighten. "You're not betraying anyone," I whispered. "You're allowing yourself to live. And I'm not here to replace anyone. I just want to be with you, as I am, and to share moments like this, honestly, completely." For a heartbeat, the room fell into silence, filled only by the faint ticking of the clock and the occasional whisper of wind against the window. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze and met mine fully, without hesitation, without fear. The tension between us, all the uncertainty, the longing, the doubt, seemed to release in that instant. She moved just slightly closer, enough that her shoulder brushed mine. Her head tilted, and I could see the faintest tremor in her hand as she rested it over mine. A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was release, acknowledgement, and a fragile joy. "I've wanted this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been afraid, but I don't want to be afraid anymore." I pulled her hand gently to my lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of reverence and tenderness. In that moment, the world outside, the storm, the distance, the fear, faded away. There was only us, two souls bridging the past and the present, learning to trust again, learning that connection could be as quiet as a shared glance, and as powerful as the promise of being together. That night, we didn't rush, we didn't speak too much. We simply existed in the fragile, beautiful reality of closeness, knowing that the bond we had nurtured through hesitation and doubt had finally blossomed into something honest, something real, something worth holding on to. The weeks that followed felt different, lighter, yet charged with a quiet anticipation. Our conversations no longer danced around invisible walls. Each meeting, each shared smile, each brush of hands carried with it a trust we had both carefully built. The emotional storm that had kept us hesitant seemed to settle, leaving behind a calm that was both comforting and exhilarating. One evening, she invited me over again, this time not for tea, not for help with errands, but simply to spend time together. The air in her home was warm, scented faintly with lavender and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The lamp on the table cast soft, golden light across the room, illuminating her face and the subtle lines that carried years of love, loss, and resilience. We sat close on the couch, the space between us intimate but unforced. I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath her blouse, the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine as we talked about everything and nothing. It was a closeness built on trust, on understanding, and on the quiet acknowledgement that we no longer needed to hide what we felt. "I never imagined I'd feel this way again," she said softly, her fingers brushing mine as she spoke. "I thought my heart was, well, closed off, locked away forever. But you've reminded me that it can still beat, even after everything I've lost." Her words made something tighten in my chest, a mix of awe, tenderness, and deep affection. I lifted her hand gently, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "You've never been close to me," I replied. "I only had to wait until you were ready to see that life could still be shared. I don't want to replace anyone from your past. I just want to be part of your present, if you'll have me." For a long moment, she was silent, her gaze fixed on mine. Then she leaned in slightly, resting her head on my shoulder. The weight of that gesture was enormous, yet delicate. It spoke of surrender, of acceptance, of choosing connection over fear. I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the warmth of her body against mine, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. In that quiet embrace, we didn't need words. The journey, the hesitation, the longing, the subtle touches, the emotional vulnerability, had led us here. We had navigated the delicate balance between grief and hope, between fear and desire, and emerged on the other side with something real, something fragile but undeniable. The night outside was calm, the storm long gone. We stayed like that for a while, simply existing in each other's presence, letting the silence speak for us. There was no rush, no grand declarations beyond what we had already shown in our shared trust and tenderness. Finally, she lifted her head, smiling softly. "I want to try," she said, eyes glistening. "Slowly, carefully, but truly. With you." I smiled back, feeling a profound relief, a quiet joy that was impossible to describe. "Then we'll take it one day at a time," I whispered, "together." That night, as I left her home, the sense of resolution was complete. Not because every question was answered or every fear erased, but because we had chosen each other. We had acknowledged our pasts, our pain, and our hopes, and decided that what mattered most was the connection we were building now. It was a beginning, yes, but one rooted in trust, respect, and the slow, careful unfolding of love.